On April 11, 2025, South Carolina carried out one of the rarest execution methods still legal in the United States. 42-year-old Mikal Mahdi faced a firing squad, making him the second inmate in state history to die this way. But before we talk about his chosen method of death, his final statement, and his final meal, we have to go back to where it all began. It started in Virginia on July 14, 2004, when Mikal, then 21, stole a pistol from his neighbor. But he didn't stop there. He also took a station wagon and a set of license plates to cover his tracks. He had a plan, and his first stop was North Carolina. The next day, in Winston-Salem, he walked into a convenience store with a can of beer. Behind the counter stood 29-year-old Christopher Jason Boggs, a store clerk just doing his job. He asked Mikal for ID. That's when Mikal pulled out the stolen pistol. Without saying a word, he aimed and shot Christopher in the face. The young man collapsed, bleeding on the floor. But Mikal wasn't done. He stepped closer, raised the gun again, and fired a second shot straight into Christopher's body, point blank, without hesitation. Surveillance footage caught what happened next. After shooting Christopher, Mikal tried to open the cash register, but he couldn't figure it out. He fumbled with it for a moment, then gave up. Instead, he robbed Christopher's lifeless body, grabbed the beer he had walked in with, and calmly walked out. Then he got in the stolen station wagon and headed south toward South Carolina. But that was only the beginning. On July 17th, just 2 days after killing Christopher, Mikal struck again, this time in downtown Columbia. He carjacked a man, swapped out the license plates, and pulled into a gas station to refuel. There, he tried to use a stolen credit card, but it didn't work. The employees noticed something was off and called the police. But before officers could arrive, Mikal ditched the stolen car and took off on foot. Within a mile from the gas station, he stumbled onto a quiet piece of farmland in Calhoun County. There, he broke into the workshop and stayed hidden inside, flipping through TV channels like he had all the time in the world. He browsed through the tools and inspected a stash of guns, completely unaware of whose property he was on. It belonged to James Edward Myers, a 56-year-old police captain. That day, James had been with his wife and 5 children, celebrating birthdays, surrounded by cake, laughter, and love, never imagining the horror that was waiting back home. When James returned home, Mikal ambushed him. He grabbed a .22 caliber rifle from the workshop and opened fire. 9 bullets. 3 hit James in the head. 1 tore through his heart. There was no chance to fight back, no time to call for help. Then Mikal poured diesel fuel over his body and set it on fire. He stole the man's police-issued truck, his shotgun, and his service rifle and drove off like nothing happened. Hours later, James's wife, Amy, who also was a law enforcement officer, went looking for her husband. What she found was the worst thing a person can see: the burned body of the man she married, lying in a pool of his own blood right in the same shed where they'd taken their wedding photos just a year before. By then, Mikal was already gone, and he had crossed the state lines into Florida. But he didn't get far. Police caught up with him in Satellite Beach, Florida, after someone complained about a reckless driver in a white pickup truck. But Satellite Police Sergeant Jeff Pearson says Mikal did not surrender without a fight. He jumped out of the car with a semi-automatic rifle. He wisely decided to throw it down and then took off running. After almost a week of violence, the manhunt ended on July 21, 2004. Mikal was extradited back to South Carolina and charged with burglary, grand larceny, and the murder of James Myers. But what followed was a legal battle that dragged on for years. Prosecutors pushed for the death penalty, pointing to Mikal's long record, his lack of remorse, and the brutality of his actions. And they also revealed something chilling. 6 years earlier, during a standoff with police, Mikal had sworn he would one day kill a cop. Now, they argued, he had finally followed through. Mikal's lawyers tried to argue for life in prison. They said he had a traumatic childhood, Abandoned by his mother, neglected by his father, bounced from home to home. They said he'd been institutionalized as a child for suicidal behavior and grew up angry, broken, and ignored, and he had spent most of his childhood in juvenile. But the jury wasn't moved. Days later, he pled guilty. On December 8, 2006, the judge sentenced him to death. Mikal was just 23 years old at that time. Later, he was also charged in North Carolina for the murder of Christopher Boggs, for which he got life without parole. Then came the appeals. He filed one after another, claiming his lawyers failed him, that there was new evidence, or that death by execution was cruel and unusual punishment, but all were denied. And if you think the story ends there, it doesn't. Because in 2009, while sitting on death row, Mikal got involved in yet another violent plot, this time with fellow condemned inmate Quincy Allen. Together, they came up with a plan to kill a correctional officer. They lured the guard with a simple request. "Can we go to the basketball court?" But once outside, they jumped him, stabbing him again and again. The officer survived, but the scars didn't fade. The attack cost him his job, his sense of safety, and his peace of mind. As for Mikal, he lost all privileges behind bars, but his death sentence remained untouched. He stayed right where he was, on death row. Then, for over a decade, everything stalled. South Carolina couldn't get lethal injection drugs. Executions stopped. The state responded by rewriting its laws, bringing back the electric chair, and introducing a third option, the firing squad. By 2023, the courts had cleared the way. Mikal's appeals were done, and his name was on the list. On March 14, 2025, his death warrant was signed. He had until March 28 to choose between three options: lethal injection, electrocution, or firing squad. If he didn't choose, the state would do it for him. Eventually, he chose the firing squad, just like Brad Keith Sigmund on March 7, 2025. According to his lawyers, the thought of burning in the electric chair or suffocating slowly on a gurney haunted Mikal. So when the time came, he chose what he believed was the quickest way out, the least of three evils, they said. On April 11, 2025, Mikal chose a last meal of ribeye steak cooked medium, mushroom risotto, broccoli, collard greens, cheesecake, and sweet tea. Then Mikal was placed in a chair, a target pinned to his chest, and a black cap covering his head at 6:01 p.m. During a firing squad execution, the inmate is strapped into a metal chair in a room that also contains the state's electric chair, which remains in place. A hood is placed over the inmate's head, and a target is marked over their heart. 3 voluntary corrections officers stand behind a wall, 15 feet away with loaded rifles. The wall has a small opening, not visible to witnesses. After the warden reads the execution order, the officers fire. A doctor then examines the inmate, and once death is confirmed, the curtain is drawn and witnesses leave. Witnesses, including family members, media, and attorneys, can see the inmate's right side profile through bullet-resistant glass. Mikal gave no final statement, didn't speak, and never looked at the witnesses, including his own lawyer, who were seated just feet away. The state's firing squad protocol called for 3 prison staff to fire simultaneously, aiming at a bullseye target on Mahdi's chest. What followed was described by those in the room as both shocking and deeply disturbing. Mahdi let out a sharp yell that cut through the silence. One witness said it felt like a deep heave, as if his chest expanded hard, then collapsed. His arms flexed, and he groaned twice, about 45 seconds after the bullets hit. Witnesses reported that he continued to breathe for another 80 seconds, taking what appeared to be a final gasp before going still. A prison doctor stepped forward and pronounced him dead at 6:05 p.m., less than 4 minutes after he was shot. At 42 years old, Mikal Mahdi was dead. By the time he died, Mikal had spent 68% of his life either in juvenile or adult prison.